now let's just talk about what second phase is all about. It's all about diving. The water is what separates the SEAL teams from every other special operations unit in the world. And the reason is the ocean covers 2/3 of the world. If you control the ocean, you control the world. I mean, the oceans cover, if you control the ocean, you control the economy, you control supply chains, you control food, you control water, you control everything. World domination is control of the ocean. China is working really hard right now to beat us out in as far as controlling waterways, controlling the ocean, because they understand that. And as frogmen, as Navy SEALs, that's has to be one of our main focuses, because no one else is focusing in the special operations world for water operations, shipping, undersea. No one else is focusing on that. We are the best in the world at this. And so the second phase of BUDS is really focusing on that diving aspect, that underwater aspect of controlling the world and controlling special operations. So things that you cover academically, you cover dive medicine, dive physics, open and closed circuit dive tables. You cover mission planning. We've talked a little bit about tides and currents, things like that. And just to kind of give you an idea of a quick story about tides and currents and mission planning, we did some work somewhere in the world, and we didn't do tides and currents. We just thought we would drive our Zodiac into the beach, hide it for a few hours while we went and did what we needed to do, and then come back, grab our Zodiacs, put them back in the across the beach, get back in the ocean, and go back to where we started. Well, in the few hours that our Zodiacs were put away and we were out doing the things that we were doing, when we came back to put our boats back in the water, we did not plan on staying there over the next day. But what had happened is we arrived at high tide. While we were out working, the low tide happened. So the tide went out, and in this particular area of the world, the difference between high tide and low tide is about a mile. So Zodiacs are they're not like the little rubber boats that you carry around at BUDS. You got engines, you got gear, you got gasoline, you got water, you got food, you got stuff in there. And they're extremely heavy. And so we weren't going to be able to carry these Zodiacs a mile across the seabed, because that's how far out the ocean retracted while we were working. So we actually had to stay in that area over the day into the next night, hoping not to be compromised by anyone, while high tide came back in so that we could put the boats in the water and get out. So that's how critical mission planning is, and tides and currents. It's not sexy. It's just a necessary evil. So every class in BUDS loses someone to academics. They lose someone to the physical aspect of what second phase offers. So, you can make it through Hell Week. Awesome. I've seen guys get kicked out of BUDS for academics. I saw one guy, and I don't know if he really failed because he wasn't smart, but I watched a guy, he failed the academic portion of second phase, but then he ended up going to EOD, which has way more academics than the SEAL teams, and he became an awesome EOD tech. And I actually worked with him overseas. He was fantastic. He was super smart. And so maybe he failed because of that. I don't know, but definitely he got kicked out of BUDS because he failed the academic side of it. And so the academics don't stop at BUDS. Once you get to the SEAL team, you get more academics. Sniper school, there's so many academics that go along with that. Being a dive soup, being a jump master, all these qualifications that you need to be a good frogman or a good special operator. There's a lot of academics that go along with that. So you got to do the academics part. That's why you have to take the ASVAB and have a certain score on it to make sure that you have the aptitude to be a Navy SEAL or a SF guy or a Ranger or a MARSOC guy. So again, going back to second phase, the first 3 weeks of second phase, you're all open circuit, and you're going to dive a rig that's very Jacques Cousteau like. You're gonna dive twin 80s, which is two 80 cubic foot scuba tanks hooked together, and then this regulator is actually on the back, not like a traditional scuba diving rig. This has an inhalation hose and it has an exhalation hose. And the reason for that is so they can tie more knots in it, make it more difficult for you at the end of the day. But also they're preparing you to dive a closed circuit rig, which is 100% O2. And it has an inhalation hose and it has an exhalation hose. And there's a right and a wrong way to put it together and things like that. So you do a bunch of different tasks in second phase underwater, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to do what every other challenging event does. They're trying to put a lot of pressure on you, take your air away from you, and have you problem solve in a very specific way, follow very specific details, attention to detail directions under extreme duress and stress. So that's what second phase is about, at least the first 3 weeks. They train you how to do it, and then they test you to see if you still have what it takes. And I've seen guys get kicked out of BUD/S because they failed pool comp. So two major events in the open circuit portion of second phase. The first event is that you have to pass is you have to tread water with your twin 80s on and your weight belt and your full dive kit. That seems easy, but it's not. You're not diving a traditional BCD that you would like out in the civilian world. You have these twin 80s on your back. They're very heavy, and air in the water, compressed air, is more heavy than water. So it's trying to sink. It doesn't float. But a little trick that you could do if you're going to BUD/S is breathe your tanks down as much as you can prior to having to tread water, and it'll be a little bit easier. Just a little trick. So one of the other tricks that you can do for treading water is you have to tread water with your hands out of the water. There's not really a good point for this, but it just is the standard. One of the other trick that you can do, you can leave your head up and you can breathe as much as you want all day long, or you can put your head under the water, because that's 8 pounds of useless bone that you're holding up out of the water. You can actually put your head under the water. As long as your hands stay out of the water above your wrists, you're good to go. And you just need to stay shallow enough to breathe when you need to breathe, and your hands stay out of the water. So that's sort of the trick for that. The culmination of second phase is pool comp. This is the event that is harder, in my opinion, and not only my opinion, in many people's opinion, than any other evolution in BUD/S. It was the hardest thing by far. Hell Week was hard. Pool comp was the hardest. And I failed pool comp the first time. I was not happy. So that made it even more stressful the second time. But basically, pool comp it's like underwater jiu-jitsu on a breath hold. And so you have your regulator, you have your whole rig on, and you're crawling along the bottom. You start off with your mask on, your fins on, your weight belt, and the instructors come down and they give you a diving problem. Like, the first thing, they might take your hose and they wrap it around, the inhalation hose or the exhalation hose. They might wrap that around. You don't take your gear off if you have an exhalation problem, because you're still getting air in. So the first time I couldn't reach back far enough to get that knot untied or unhooked from my hose, from my regulator. So I started to take my tanks off. I failed because that was an exhalation problem, not an inhalation problem. And you don't take your tanks off if you have a exhalation problem, something like that. So I'm like, damn it. And then I had to do it again. And so during pool comp, they give you more and more harder problems until you get to a point where you can't untie the knots. It's called the whammy knot. And so someone else told me, this was kind of the beauty of having been rolled back several times. I knew lots of people that had gone before me and been successful, and they just gave me clues on what to do and how to succeed. And one of the things that they told me is, if there's a bubble, there's air. And I took that to heart because I have micro lungs. You know, the instructors, they can see you breathing, inhaling and exhaling, and they let you take a breath in. You can see the guy like swim down. You can see his shadow. You know he's there, even though he's kicked your ass. You don't have fins. You don't have a mask. You just have blurry vision. And you can see him there, and he's waiting. His hand might even be on your mouthpiece, waiting for you to finish your inhale before he rips it out and ties the thing up in knots. So you have that opportunity to take a big fat breath. You are under a tremendous amount of stress, pass or fail. Am I going to be able to hold my, like, all this nonsense is going through your brain. And so I'm pretty much, I was ready to breathe. I was out of breath before the instructor was done tying his knots. He's on a breath hold also. He's been on a breath hold longer than me. He's doing work. I'm just sitting there getting my ass kicked. And then I have to go through the problem. And what I ended up doing is I untied every single whammy knot, because anytime I worked on the knot, and I got it just so that I could get a bubble. I found a bubble. I got some air. I got a little more air. And then I did that over and over and over until I untied every single knot. And then eventually the instructor pulled me up and he's like, you passed, even though you didn't go through all the procedures, because you've untied 3 whammy knots in a row. I'm not doing it again. It's clear that you're going to untie that knot. So I didn't have to do the final procedure, which is you work on the knot. You can't do it. You ask permission to go to the surface. Then you have to take your tanks off, you lay them down, you take your life jacket off, you put it down, you take your weight belt from across the back of your legs, because when you work on your tanks, you drop your weight belt so that it holds you to the bottom. Then you take your weight belt, you play it across your tanks, then you ask permission again, and then you kiss the bottom of the pool, and then you blow all of your air out while you're at depth, because as you go up in depth, air expands, and you should never ever go up in depth holding your breath from compressed air. It's okay from the surface to the bottom, back to the surface, but on compressed air, never ever, because you will embolize yourself. Those little bubbles inside your lungs will make your lungs explode. So the instructor, then he comes down and he escorts you to the surface. You're still on that breath hold. Wait, no, you've blown all the air out of your lungs. And then he comes down and he punches you in the stomach just to make sure that you don't have any more air in your lungs, and you have to open your mouth and hold your mouth open all the way to the surface, and he kind of brings you up to the surface. That's pool comp. That sucks. And again, this was, in my opinion, and many other people's opinion, the hardest evolution in BUD/S, hands down. But you know, all evolutions are hard. This one is just I believe, the hardest one. So you graduate pool comp, then you start learning how to dive a closed circuit rig, 100% O2 rig, and it's some of the same lessons that you learned while you were in doing pool comp with that open circuit double hose regulator. The difference now is this is a closed circuit rig, and you can never let water inside those hoses. So you have to have very good mouth control. You have to bite the mouthpiece, and you have a dive surface rotary valve. And if you're gonna buddy breathe, which is one of the hardest things ever to do on a closed circuit rig, is you have to take a breath in, and then you close this very hard to maneuver dive surface rotary valve, and then you pass, maybe your buddy's on your back or maybe he's below you, and you pass the hose to your buddy, and they're like on a breath hold, and they're like micro lungs also. And then they have to first they have to like clear the water out of the mouthpiece. Then they open the dive surface rotary valve. Then they get some air in, and then they hold their breath, and then they close their dive surface rotary valve, and they pass. And it's the worst thing on the planet. I hate buddy breathing on a closed circuit rig. Anyway, I digress. So the rest of second phase, you're really doing you're doing dive planning, and you're practicing navigation, underwater navigation. So they give you a board that has a giant compass on it, a depth gauge so that you know what your depth is, because when you're diving 100% O2, you don't really ever want to go below 20 feet unless you absolutely have to, and you don't want to get too close to the surface, because then you lose your buoyancy and you start kicking the surface, and then you're exposed, and the whole point is to be unseen from the surface. So you end up you learn to navigate, and really it's just swimming out and turning around and swimming back, and hopefully you didn't go too far left or right. You also learn pace count. How many kicks is 100 yards? 2 minutes of diving should be 100 yards. So you're practicing that as well. And those are the things that you do every day when you dive. So apparently my class, the second phase cadre did not like us. I guess they were like, your first phase was too hard. You got too many people. We're going to kick your ass some more. So what we ended up doing, you graduate Hell Week. You think you never have to touch those boats again. Well, I kind of knew this was coming, because I had a buddy in 205, Chad, who I checked into buds with. He told me that they had this very same thing happen to them. So I was a little bit mentally prepared. Is that, we came back from lunch one day, and there were a bunch of the boats were in the second phase portion of the compound. And I was like, oh, it's on. So here's what happened. We screwed up a bunch. We couldn't quite get it together. I don't know what it was, but it was time to pay the man. So we ended up forming up in boat crews. First they said, okay, go get your sea bag and your fins and your mask and your little hat, because we're going to go have some fun. So we put those boats on our heads, sea bags, and went down towards the demo pits, which is about 1.5 miles away. We hadn't carried these boats on our head for kind of a long time. I was hoping to never do it again, but I didn't get that hope. So we got down towards the demo pits. They said, fill up your sea bag with sand. Now, a sea bag full of sand is about 300 pounds. And then they had us put them on and try to stand up, and it was just like weeble wobbles. We all just kept falling over. So they said, okay, dump half of the sand out. And so in buds, we have a lot of different classes have foreign exchange students come through. And we had one guy in this particular class was from Greece. And when I say he wasn't that smart and he was extremely lazy, that is an understatement. So we get down to the demo pits. He's in my boat crew. I'm not happy about this. He puts the lock on his sea bag to keep it shut, and it's got 300 pounds of sand in it. Well, they say, hey, dump the sand out of your sea bag. He's like, sorry, I cannot. I left the key to the lock in my room. And so what ended up happening is his sea bag full of sand, 300 pounds, ended up in the boat for all of the races. Now, what I haven't told you guys is I was in Boat Crew 3 during Hell Week. We won almost every race. And even though I had rolled out of 207 and into 208, most of the guys that were in my boat crew eventually also rolled out due to, pool comp or whatever. So I had most of my old boat crew now in second phase. And we didn't talk about this. We just sort of like ended up gravitating together, because we would screw up and go get on a boat and go get in we eventually, after about 15 or 20 minutes of like messing around and having reindeer games, we were like, oh, hey, there's Chuck, there's so-and-so, and we all ended up under the same boat. And then we started winning all the races again. And when you suffer from the front and you win the races, guess what? You get to take more breaks than everyone else. So it didn't take us long to figure that out. The other thing that we had to do during this really fun evolution of carrying 40 pounds of sand on our back is we had to wear our dive mask, and not allowed. And you're running, you're sweating, you're working, and the dive mask is filling up with sweat, and that sweat just burns your eyeballs. And they're like, don't you clear that sweat out of there? And there would be times where you could kind of like, doing push-ups, you hit your mask on your shoulder and some sweat would come out, and you would just have less sweat burning your eyeballs in there. So that was a good thing. So just because you've finished first phase, just because there's no more goon squad, just because you're progressing through buds, that does not mean that they're not going to kick your ass whenever you become complacent as a class. And when you're controlling 50 plus people, there's a lot of complacency that happens, and some of it is culturally, like I've talked about before, 207 would do something, and I would think that we're going to get hammered, because in 206 we would do half of that thing and get hammered. So things like that didn't really happen. I don't know what 208's first phase was really like. I just knew that they had a lot of people, and they were a summer hell week, so they weren't quite as hard as the rest of us. But anyway, so going back to diving, we finished out second phase. Oh, let's just talk about diving a little bit. Working on a rebreather. So there's the dive medicine piece of it is really critical here, and you brief all the medical contingencies at every dive, before every dive, and even after. In the event that there was some sort of casualty. So you're breathing 100% O2, and the way you get 100% O2 is you have this stuff. It's called Sodasorb. It looks like kitty litter. You put it into a canister, you tap it in, you make sure it's nice and tight, you blow all the dust out of it, and you seal it up. And then you put your breathing hoses on it, and then you have a breathing bag, and that's connected to a bottle with O2. So you can stay underwater swimming for 4 hours if you're really, really good at this. If you're really good at closed circuit diving, you can stay underwater and go to a mission. You can go somewhere and come back and be underwater for up to 4 hours without ever breaking the surface of the water or giving away your position in any way, shape, or form. So, but some things that can happen, some things can go very bad when you're diving 100% O2. If you can't really communicate underwater. You try to. You don't have any bubbles, so there's, you can. Sometimes you get irritated because you have a dive buddy always, and you can get very irritated with your buddy next to you. Maybe he's swimming too fast, or only one person drives, the other person tows a buoy. And the person towing the buoy is usually not the happy person. The person that's driving, they can focus on what's going on. Anytime I was driving, I was always happy. If I was ever the buddy towing the buoy, I was never happy. And I was always thinking about sharks and other things that are going to come and eat me while I'm out here swimming around in the ocean. And as a matter of fact, when we were doing combat swimmer in Puerto Rico in SQT after Buds, there was a 10-foot hammerhead that several of the guys in the class, I know Rob O'Neill and his swim buddy saw it during one of the night dives. I didn't see it. I mean, I saw shadows and stuff all the time. I was for sure that I was going to be eaten by a shark, even though I loved the water. What? Every 2 mile ocean swim, I thought for sure, like, we need to hurry up and get out of here, because the faster I go, the sooner I'm out of the water, the less opportunity that I will be to be eaten by a shark. But that does remind me that on one of the swims in the end of first phase, it was super glassy out there, and we went down, we're coming back, and I'm thinking shark like every stroke. I'm like, shark, okay, shark, swim faster. Okay, shark, swim faster. And one time I looked up, and I looked on the other side of my buddy, and I saw a giant dorsal fin, and I was like, oh my God. So I grabbed my buddy, I turned around, I'm like, look, shark. And it actually was like a school of dolphins that were swimming right past us. We were swimming back north, they were swimming south, and but that was my only real close encounter to maybe seeing a shark on a swim. So I wouldn't really worry about it. If you are, you just swim faster. Or if you come in contact with a shark, we always used to joke, you stab your buddy and you swim away. I digress. So back to second phase. So we covered the end of Hell Week, what happens after Hell Week, the rest of first phase. We covered second phase. It's very academic. You have some very large challenges still to do. Milestones. The 7 mile ocean swim is a milestone. Pool comp, major milestone. To get into third phase. Not a lot of people wash out after pool comp, although there are some, and I've seen people get kicked out of third phase, like get almost to the end of training and get kicked out. It happens, but generally has to do with some sort of safety or performance where they were just barely getting by, or there was some sort of medical thing that held them back. As a matter of fact, and I'll probably cover this when I talk about third phase, is there was a guy who passed out almost every time he held his breath underwater. The 50-meter underwater swim, underwater knot tying, things like that. But he made it through Hell Week. He made it through dive phase. He was on the island with us out at San Clemente Island, third phase. We were tying demo onto these obstacles out there, kind of like the old World War II style, frogman, UDT. And he passed out on the island. Well, they went back, and because you have different instructors for different phases of training, they went back and looked at his record. They were like, this dude passes out every time he holds his breath underwater. He is a liability medically. We can't have that happening in the SEAL teams. And so he got kicked out of BUD/S. To no fault of his own, it was just something, the way that when he would hold his breath, it would like cut the blood to his aorta or something off, which cut the blood off to his brain, which made him pass out. So not his fault. He made it really to the end. He should have graduated, but he couldn't be a Navy SEAL. So that sucks. And that does happen. And that could happen to any one of you. There could be some weird medical thing out there that you don't actually know about. It doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to be a SEAL. It just means that physically they can't take that risk. So anyway, let's just talk about a couple lessons that we covered in here. Adversity. Adversity is a good thing. Adversity is the thing that gets you better. So the more you practice putting yourself into doing hard things, getting yourself into it, practicing, working through adversity, when life actually hands you a shit sandwich, you are able to more easily navigate that shit sandwich and get over that obstacle, whatever it was. Let's see, what other lessons? I didn't write any more lessons down for this episode, but I'm sure there are a couple out there. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. Next week or the next episode will be shorter because I'll just cover third phase, and depending how short that is, I may cover Hell Week also. We'll see. Maybe third phase and Hell Week will be the next episode. Anyway, if you have requests for episodes or any questions that you have, we just finished up a Q&A today. Send us those questions. Send me those questions and give me some more stuff to talk about or the ability to answer your questions in this forum, in sort of this podcast, long form forum, storytelling and the such. But anyway, you guys stay awesome, and I will talk to you soon.